Okay, why don't we get started? Again, my name is Erik Daly. I am a corporate attorney here at Miller Johnson, and we would like to thank everybody again for joining our Monday morning team COVID response team roundup here. I think today's program will be relatively concise. We just have 3 topics to cover. First, my associate Hunter Reams in our tax group will provide a brief update on some recent tax credit developments or maybe non-developments, depending on how you look at them. I'll then give a brief update on some SBA, Small Business Administration funding developments from the last week. And then my colleague Hillary Scholten will kind of bring us home with some information about how clients can participate in the MIOSHA feedback process for rulemaking related to workplace safety and COVID issues. So that's our agenda for today. I think we'll get through it pretty quickly and we'll circle back for any questions at the end, unless it makes sense to address them during the flow of the presentation. And I think Hunter is going to kick us off first with a discussion on some of the tax credit updates. Hunter?
Thank you, Erik, and good morning, all. As Erik said, my name is Hunter Reams. I'm an associate in the tax group as well as in the corporate mergers and acquisitions group. And this morning, I will be discussing with you the tax credits that were announced by the White House for small businesses to provide PTO for vaccinations and associated recovery. So to start, on April 21st, the White House and the Biden administration announced that employers will be able to use a tax credit to provide PTO for employees to get vaccinated. The White House said that the IRS would follow up shortly with the cheat sheet, which they did. And the cheat sheet basically said that small businesses, 500 employees or fewer, will be eligible to utilize payroll tax credits to cover employee wages for those employees who take time off to get vaccinations and recover from those vaccinations through September 30th, 2021. And it should be noted, and this was a little confusing at first, that these tax credits were actually originally announced under the American Rescue Plan Act. And essentially it is rebranding of the paid sick leave and the family leave tax credits that were already expanded. So they're really, at the end of the day, the framework for these new tax credits are really the same as what we had already established under the APRA. Next slide, please. So for some specifics, businesses and nonprofits with less than 500 employees will be eligible for tax credits for all PTO up to a certain level between April 1st and September 30th. So these tax credits will include wages paid up to 80 hours of paid sick leave in an amount equal to 100% of employees' regular wages. And this will be capped at $511 per day for a total of 10 days, and that's so the total credit up to $5,110. These tax credits will be used against employer share of the Medicare tax, and they are refundable. So if there's a situation in which your payroll taxes do not equal that level that you would have gotten the tax credit for, there's actual cash refund that will be available if the credits exceed what employer share of the Medicare tax is. Next slide, please. So as far as claiming the credits, it's going to be similar to paid sick leave and family medical leave. Form 941, which is the employer quarterly federal tax return, there should be a line that will be on the form 941, if not already now, that will allow you to just put in the amount of wages that you deem necessary to get the tax credit for. It should be quite straightforward. And if there's a case where there may not be enough taxes paid to get that full credit, the form 7200 is one that you can also file that will be for those types of employers that do not quite have enough federal employment taxes to cover the amounts that are deemed provided. So payroll providers should be able to help you navigate through utilizing these tax credits. They're well familiar by now with the way that these COVID tax credits have worked, and these vaccination tax credits are no different. So for next steps, we would definitely recommend discussing with payroll providers on the best way to utilize and document and get those credits as soon as possible. And so likewise for employees, if you feel like, your employer is not aware, or for smaller businesses, things like that, certainly, just letting company management know of these tax credits, because they're definitely easy to utilize and will be very helpful for businesses. So at that point, Erik, I will bring it back to you to discuss SBA funding.
Great. Thank you very much, Hunter. Really appreciate that. And Hunter's, if I can interject briefly before I get into the SBA funding issue, Hunter's had the unique privilege of getting to deal with both SBA updates and IRS updates, since he's a tax attorney, but he's also been an integral part of our PPP response team and knowledge center around those issues. So we appreciate it, Hunter, and I think we found collectively that a lot of employers have come around to realize, there's some liquidity available to them under those retention tax credits, whether in this context or otherwise, either related to last year, 2020, or going forward. So if you have questions about any of that stuff, even if you were a PPP borrower or are a PPP borrower, you may be eligible for both, actually. And so if you have questions about sort of the interplay between those two things, you can reach out to me and or Hunter, as we've been working with a number of clients who are residing in sort of the middle part of that Venn diagram, if you will. Okay, that's a good segue into, I guess, my area of update. That's a nice picture of me before COVID, by the way. Hopefully we'll get back to that kind of outlook and dress code again soon. But for the time being, let's talk about the Paycheck Protection Program. Not a lot to report here relative to last week. Funding is still available. It looks like there's somewhere between $40 and $50 billion in appropriations still available, with a B, billion. And SBA did not update the exact numbers over the weekend or going into the weekend, so it's a little hard to tell. It's also been a little while, and I checked the website this morning. I'll check again while, no disrespect to Hillary, while Hillary is presenting, to see if they've updated anything related to forgiveness, but they also had not had any new updates on the amount of loans forgiven in the aggregate, or how much was in like the forgiveness pipeline, if you will, since April 8th. So it's been a couple of weeks. Maybe they have updated it this morning, and I'll take a quick look. But right now, the deadline for applying, if you haven't applied, but you're eligible for either a first draw loan, as they call it, or a second draw loan, is May 31st. But if the appropriations run out before then, that's the actual deadline, because going down to the next bullet point, there's no real clear trajectory for any potential congressional action on PPP. The one where it looks like there may be the straightest line of shot from, bill being introduced to actual change in legislation would be I think a couple of bipartisan senators introduced legislation to allow for retroactive loan increases for PPP loans for Schedule C filers, because there were some changes at the beginning of this year under the along with the change in administration that made loan amounts larger potentially for those types of tax filers / PPP borrowers. But the way it was implemented did not arguably allow for retroactive increases to loans that had been originated before that change in the interpretation of the law. So there may be something that allows for retroactive filing for Schedule C filers that largely be self-employed individuals or sole proprietors. So not businesses that employ numerous employees. So if you work with independent contractors who are kind of out on their own, say, and they're looking at their PPP loans, and you want to be a helpful partner, you might call this out to them. even if it doesn't apply to you directly. And then on the PPP side, one other note, kind of harkening back to what I said about Hunter serving in a dual capacity, the tax implications of PPP loans have changed since their original inception. Without getting into all the weeds, basically the original CARES Act, which was the genesis of the Paycheck Protection Program, didn't say anything about the deductibility of expenses that were basically funded by PPP loans and then forgiven. So the IRS last year stepped in and said, we're not going to treat those PPP funded expenses as deductible expenses because the loan amount is forgiven. And so we, the IRS, would view that as sort of a double dipping under some existing IRS principles and guidance that kind of predated that. And then at the end of last year, Congress stepped in and said, no, that wasn't what we wanted. When we were silent, that meant we assumed they would be deductible, and that was our intent all along. And so that's the statutory law now. That's part of the PPP loan framework. It's not an interpretation by any agency, IRS, SBA. It's part of the law. But the IRS had already accepted some 2020 tax year returns at that point. And so some businesses had relied on the prior IRS guidance and position that those expenses were not deductible. And Hunter, you can jump in here if I get any of this wrong from a technical perspective, but essentially what IRS is saying now is, listen, we get that those expenses are deductible under the law. It's been amended. But rather than have taxpayers go back and amend prior year returns or request some kind of administrative adjustment, we're going to also, I think it's also in lieu of, you may still be able to amend your prior tax year returns for this. But in addition to that, if it's easier, you can just take those deductions on your 2021 tax return, even though they relate to 2020. So we may not have many clients in that particular situation, because I think most clients prepared their 2020 tax returns and filed them after the new law went into effect, allowing explicitly for the deductibility. But on the off chance that you did file early, or your 2020 tax year ended and at an earlier date, so you had to file before then, or some other unique circumstance, just know that there's a few different avenues I think that you can take here to make sure you get the benefit of those deductions if you didn't originally. Next slide, please. Okay, shuttered venue operator grants. And I hope, as I always try to emphasize, I'm not, when I talk about delays on the SBA side or launches and programs and coordinating between different agencies, I don't want any of it to come across as me bashing SBA or IRS or any other agency, Treasury, especially for these programs that, like the PPP, were rolled out very quickly at the beginning of the pandemic. Of course, in retrospect, there were things that could have done differently to improve the rollout. But if we all remember 13 months ago, there were dire economic forecasts, and small businesses were, literally shut down. So, they had to get money out quickly. And yes, there was fraud, and yes, there was definitely some equity in how the funds got out through PPP. And I think a lot of that has been remedied between congressional action and SBA prolonging that program. Kind of on the other end of the spectrum, you've got the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant Program, where SBA kind of swung the pendulum very far in the other direction for a variety of reasons. Some of it, I think, had to do with those concerns that they didn't want to be seen as rolling out the SFOG, as they call it, program, too hastily and allowing the funds to get deployed first to the more informed, connected, better, however you want to put it, the more connected members of the eligible pool of grant recipients. So they were very deliberate in how they kind of rolled out this program. So it was authorized back in December of 2020. And there were many versions of, maybe overstating it. There were at least 6 versions of FAQs that were released while they built out the application portal, which was originally launched, I think, on April 8th, thereabouts, and that crashed due to technical issues that were remedied or have supposedly been remedied by SBA and its vendors since then. And originally they were going to reopen it yesterday, Saturday, after providing notice that would be the case late in the day on Thursday of last week, and updating some of the guidance and application processes last Thursday. There was pushback on that. As you can imagine, a lot of venue operators, are busy over the weekend, and they, to their credit, they got the feedback from the various constituents, like live venue operators, movie theaters, museums, zoos, talent representatives, all the potential grant recipients, and they pushed back the opening to today, Monday, at noon Eastern. So hopefully everything will go smoothly as the portal reopens here. Some of the guidance has been updated. I wouldn't say it's fundamentally changed. So if you're not already kind of plugged into what's been going on with the SFOG, it's not as though the updated guidance dramatically changed who's eligible for SFOG. So you probably don't need to go back and reconsider your eligibility. But if you're already paying attention because you suspect you're eligible, or you're sort of on the borderline, it's probably worth taking a look back just to make sure, as things open up here today, that you're following the right guidance and making sure you're calculating your grant amount correctly. So I think you need to have registered before 11 a.m. Eastern today for the portal if you're going to apply. So that would be an immediate to-do if you're going to apply for this program. It's a direct grant through SBA, which is another part of the slowdown and sort of the rollout of this program, because SBA has not been in the business of doing a lot of large-scale grant programs in the past. Typically just guarantees loans that are extended by commercial and other financial institutions, much more like the P, which they leverage that sort of existing paradigm, whereas the shuttered venue operator grant program, you have to go directly through SBA's portal. So if you're behind the 8 ball on that, you can reach out to me and we can catch you up. But that's, again, today at noon is when that is launching. Next slide, please. Okay, and then lastly, the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. I talked about this in some detail during last Monday's webinar. So if you were not on that live webinar, I think Amy Scrow from our team, who I believe is on the call right now, will maybe able to share the YouTube link that links back to that. And we also did a written client update on that. That includes links to all the then available guidance and updates that SBA had provided. So 2 weekends ago, not this most recent weekend, but the weekend prior, SBA launched an information page and a bunch of guidance and program guide for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, which is another grant program, very similar to the SFOG program, but many more potential grant recipients here. You compare the number of zoos, museums, movie theaters, and the like to the number of restaurants. Obviously, even though there are quite a few movie theaters or live venue operators, still pales in comparison to the number of restaurants. So there's going to be a huge demand for these grants. And SBA, interestingly, in their continuing evolution and learning about the best way to roll out these types of programs, and hopefully in the future there won't be another need to have these programs. Just from a societal standpoint, it'd be great if there weren't pandemics and disasters that require this sort of thing, or that put SBA in this position. But given that we've been in this position for over a year, SBA actually has learned quite a lot. And so for the restaurant program in particular, they have been partnering with technology vendors that work with restaurants. So, if you think about if you go into a small or even a large restaurant where maybe you pay on a tablet that they spin around, it's powered by Square or Toast. There are a number of different players. Clover, I think, is another one. So they're leveraging partnerships with those organizations to make the application process much simpler, hopefully, and to collect a lot of the information that's necessary to determine grant amounts and the like, to automate that process so that restaurant operators can, as we're hopefully starting to emerge and operate more quote unquote normally, they can continue to focus on operating their business and not have to spend so much time on the application process itself. So this Restaurant Revitalization Fund grant program, although the framework is very similar to SVOG in terms of it's a grant from SBA and you have permitted purposes you can use it for on your business. The application process, I think, is going to be very different. And we don't have an opening date for the application yet, but they will be doing a pilot period for at least a week before they officially launch it. And then once it's officially launched, anybody can apply who is an eligible recipient. That'd be restaurants, caterers, breweries, if they sell a certain amount of food and beverage on site, things like that. And then there's certain priority funding groups that will get funded earlier for about 21 days before the other potential grant recipients. And this is a program where I suspect, just totally speculation on my part, but because the demand will be so large relative to the amount of appropriations, I think there will be further congressional action in all likelihood to appropriate more money for this program. And I think it does enjoy some bipartisan support because although, in terms of party lines, you could imagine that this type of program appeals more to, potentially sort of the Democratic side of the aisle relative to the GOP. It enjoys some support on both sides of the aisle because the shutdown of restaurants and the intermittent closures, have made it obviously very difficult for this particular industry to operate normally over the last year. And these grants are seen potentially as a way to kind of remedy some of that. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if this does get some additional appropriations from Congress beyond I think it's 28.6 billion, with a B billion that's currently appropriated. So we'll keep people posted as to when that application process will open. And again, if you have business partners who are restaurants or are in sort of adjacent to the restaurant space, it's just worth calling this out to them because eligibility here is really just any restaurant that had a decline in revenue in the first case in 2020 compared to 2019. And the permitted uses of the funds go to things like employee paid time off for sick leave or personal protective equipment or construction changes that were needed to accommodate social distancing, along with a number of other things. So it's just, one of those things where you can be a good partner to some of the companies you work with or the businesses you frequent to call this out. And I've just anecdotally, I've run into a few situations where people weren't aware of it because they're trying to, restart their restaurant business or get it back in a normal situation. And they just, they don't have time to pay attention to all the stuff coming out of SBA while that's happening. So there's, I think, one more slide that I want to cover before I turn it over to Hillary. And I won't go into a lot of detail, but this is directly from SBA's website. And I just included it in the slides because, not because I'm going to go through it in detail right now, but more it's just a reference point. If you want to go back and look at it after the webinar, or you can go on SBA's website. It's very easy to find. And this just kind of tells you, okay, if I got a PPP loan, am I also eligible for the restaurant revitalization fund or vice versa? So you can kind of, it's a sort of a cheat sheet. It doesn't have all the details. So if you have questions, you can reach out to me. But this kind of tells you how some of these programs interact. And one thing I'll touch on just very briefly before turning it over to Hillary is I didn't really talk about I haven't spent a lot of time talking about the COVID-19 EIDL or EIDL applicants, but for very small businesses right now, there's SBA is reaching out to, I'll call them super small businesses that might have been eligible for what we call EIDL advances. So these were like, if you remember back a year or so, a lot of businesses were applying for these EIDL loans, in part because they provided for grants, grants that the borrower didn't even have to refund if it didn't take on the loan, of up to $10,000, or at one point they reduced it to $1,000 per employee, and then the funding ran out and it went away altogether. But SBA has gotten the coffers replenished from Congress to sort of go back and make sure that everyone who applied for that, if they were sort of one of these super small businesses, is able to confirm that they received the full amount they were eligible for. And then for super small businesses that are in certain disadvantaged economic areas, designated areas, they may be able to receive another $5,000 EIDL advance. So again, if you are working with really small businesses that applied for an EIDL advance or an EIDL but didn't get the full thing funded, they should be checking their inbox and following through on that with SBA, because SBA is reaching back out to those who didn't get the full amount funded. So again, it's just, even if we don't have a lot of potential beneficiaries of that program on this webinar, it's the kind of thing where you can call that out to your partner, your business partners, friends and family, just so that they're aware. And that's all I had. So I'm going to, I'll take a look at the Q&A, see if there's anything, but we can stop the SBA discussion for now, and I'll turn it over to Hillary Scholten to talk about how you can kind of get engaged in the public comment and the rulemaking process related to certain new MIOSHA rules. Hillary?
Well, thank you again, Erik. That was and Hunter. That was really, really informative. Really appreciate you guys taking the time to do that. Really excited to walk us through this morning some steps for preparing public comment on the new MIOSHA rule. A lot of these things are applicable for any public rule. This one, we're specifically going to be providing some details on the MIOSHA rule in particular. We had a great webinar last week doing a real deep dive into the rules themselves. And again, Miller Johnson is happy to help you one-on-one prepare these rules, but we had just an overwhelming amount of interest from folks after that webinar interested in preparing public comment. So we were really happy to put some materials together for you this morning, just to give some guidance on preparing a public comment. So with that, yeah, let's move on. I think it's important to consider and think about why we take the time to create public comment. We're busy people. You hire your attorneys to figure out your legal needs and make sense of the statutory and regulatory framework. So why bother? Why take the time? Well, first and foremost, this is your voice in the rulemaking process. We have this opportunity, this window, to influence the rules that are going to be constructed. And an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure down the road. We have an opportunity to cut off any bad effects from this rule at this time by, raising your concerns now, offering potential solutions if you see them, and steering this rule in a reasonable, safe, of course, direction, but a way that also reflects your views of what is reasonable and safe. There's a lot of folks who raise their concerns throughout the process. And it's important just to, not assume either they're going to get it wrong or they'll get it right, but really share those stories and make it personal. Finally, this is just another tool in our tool belt to help shape the rules impacting businesses and community. We don't want to have to get to litigation down the road. I've had a number of conversations already with folks over at MIOSHA about some concerns that you all have raised, and they've been surprised to hear it and have thanked us for bringing forward, really reasonable and common sense solutions. So it's exciting to share this, and really encourage everyone to think about crafting a written statement or even possibly presenting a public statement at the hearing. Let's go on to the next slide. Thank you. So the first thing to do before you sit down to draft that rule, maybe you're really angry about the rule, or you're really fired up about how great it is. Then before you put pen to paper, I think it's important to just sit down, plan, prepare, and organize. First and foremost, learn about the proposed rule. I don't know how many of you have been to hearings on public comment. I've been to more than I care to have been to. But there is so much misinformation out there. People hear something on the news or on social media, and they say, "Well, I'm going to grandstand at the public hearing, time, and just let them know I'm really fired up." And that space, unfortunately, gets so saturated with misinformation. So it's really important to inform yourself about what the rule actually says. I've got a link there to the rule itself, and as I mentioned, Miller Johnson did a great webinar on some of the key elements of the rules that we know will really impact our clients last week, Thursday, and that's of course available on our website. And of course, throughout, goes without saying, we're all here to answer individual questions throughout the drafting. Second, it's also really important to understand the impact on you and your business, and identify 2 to 3 main areas of concern. Again, before you even sit down to start writing, just to sort of say, okay, these are the things I really want to focus on. It could be substantive, ways in which the rules limit your ability to conduct your business. It could be stylistic. You found something and you think, hey, I think they don't actually mean what they think they mean here in this rule, because the way I read it, this isn't going to come out the way they think they intended it. Believe it or not, that happens quite a bit. And it could be procedural. A lot of folks have concerns about the way that these MIOSHA rules were drafted. Many of the draft rules that are in play right now are the construction and sort of general industry practices. We are also waiting on, and they are in the process of drafting, a return to office work rules, right? Anyone who is familiar with the rules knows that, the MIOSHA has broken out risk levels for contracting COVID, and it's broken down from a very high risk level, your meat and poultry processing plants, to a really low risk level, in office. And so the intention is to promulgate individual rules based on certain industries and sectors, and the office rules are being promulgated right now. That process has a publicly accessible working group while the rules are being drafted. A lot of folks have raised concerns about the fact that there wasn't a similarly situated public-facing working group for these rules, and they didn't get to have that input at the critical initial draft stage. Finally, and this is important, for any type of piece of written communication or delivered oral communication, is to consider the audience and the context. And I think here it's really important to remember, these are policymakers in Washington. These are not individuals who work in your line of work, and they don't have the perspective that you have. So, remembering that, giving folks the benefit of the doubt that they genuinely may not have considered your particular policy position. Lansing, Washington is so full of, saturated with special interests lobbying to get, one particular perspective recognized. And so your unique voice as an employer, a business leader, community leader, leader in local government may just genuinely have not been considered before. And now's the time to really raise it. And also consider the fact that MIOSHA will be receiving thousands of comments. And so, keep it brief, keep it concise, and keep it, focused on the facts. So the essential elements of a comment, let's focus on the outline. I think there are, these are the key elements that you're going to want to remember, and I'm going to focus on each of these in the coming slides. So first is a subject heading, and then the introduction. Then we get into the issues, offering solutions. This is optional. I'll talk more about that in a minute, and then the conclusion. Next slide. So drafting your comment, address and subject heading. A lot of folks often overlook this, but I think it's a really important element for two reasons. One, just making sure it gets where it needs to go. But two, including this in the draft portion of your comment really shows the reader that you've paid attention to what's happening here. You understand the specific rule that we're talking about, and you didn't just read something on Twitter last night that enraged you and you wanted to fire off a comment on whatever link was provided. It shows you've sort of slowed down, you've thought about it, and now you're prepared to offer a really thoughtful analysis of the rule at hand. So I've provided there the contact information for Tasha Klopp, the secretary at MIOSHA, who's going to be receiving these comments, her email address, and the physical mailing address, depending on how you'd like to send off your public comment. For the subject heading, it's important to clearly identify the rule that you are addressing, and I have provided the rule site there as well as the department and bureau handling it. So let's look at the introduction. In your first sentence, identify who you are and what you do. Just very specifically, your title, your name of your business, the agency or organization that you are representing. Then in the next 1 to 3 sentences, say a little bit more about yourself, your business, your agency, your organization, or the community that you serve in a way that establishes credibility and authority. We'll get the reader to think, oh, I really want to hear what this person has to say. They're clearly a very key stakeholder in Michigan. Then say 1 to 2 sentences about the reason you're drafting the comment. Summarize, the issues that we're going to get into in the next paragraph. And this one I think is really, really important. So many public comments come off as combative, you don't care about workers one lick, and I'm here to tell you why these rules are insufficient. Or, MIOSHA exists to destroy business, and I'm here to tell you all the reasons you got it wrong. I think it goes incredibly far in identifying shared concerns, community health and safety. Creating safe workplaces, right? What employer doesn't want that? And focusing on economic recovery, an important concern for the state of Michigan right now. So then you get into the issues after you've laid out your introduction and letting the secretary know exactly what you are preparing to discuss. So identify the problem or problems in the rule that you want to address. Identify it specifically by page number, where it can be found, what is the rule. Not to say too much about this, but having worked in a government agency and had to thread through thousands of public comment, I can just tell you, it's very clear some people don't even understand, what the specific issue is. So, identify the exact point of concern. That just lends so much credibility to the point of criticism that you're addressing. Name and describe the problem with specificity. Again, be specific and concise. Don't overgeneralize. And finally, use personal examples to describe the impact on you, your business, your organization, the community that you serve. These individuals, these policymakers, they don't walk in your shoes or in your employees' shoes. They only see things from a policy perspective. And again, spaces that are so saturated with folks, just clamoring to have special interests heard. And they're so eager to hear from constituents themselves about the real impact here. And a lot of times, I've talked to folks who are considering drafting public comment and they think, well, they're the experts, they must know all this. Not the case at all. And, again, just to underscore, I've already had conversations with folks on this, and they've been really surprised to learn, certain concerns that we've raised. So, and then again, relate the issues back to the shared concerns and objectives. How will fixing this both, keep communities safe, promote safe and healthy work environments, and not unnecessarily hamstring your business, the community that you serve, your organization, etc. Fantastic. So finally, after you've laid out the issues and everything that is wrong, there's an opportunity to offer solutions. But I think it's important to remember, if you can identify those solutions, great. You are the expert in your field. Again, you may see an obvious possible outcome. Don't hold back or be shy about suggesting what you think could resolve the problem here. But if you don't see that, remember, it's not up to you to solve the problem. And it's simply okay to identify it and let folks in Washington figure it out. You could also suggest a number of things that may work. If you don't have, any possible solutions to offer, this is a great space to comment on, things that you do think work well in the rule. Anyone who receives criticism for their job knows that it really means a lot to hear that, folks are being open-minded and considering both the positive and the negative. And I really think that goes a long way in drafting public comment. Again, finally, relate these solutions and any positive feedback that you have back to shared concerns and objectives. Finally, the conclusion. This is your part to really hammer it home. Summarize the main concern with the rule, why it matters to you, summarize any possible solutions. These folks will be reading all of the public comments, but, a lot of times going back and remembering, you're just going to skim that introduction and the conclusion. So, even don't hesitate to bold and underline and really make those fine points stand out. And I think it's always important to thank the reader for their time and work on shared goals. If we go on to the next slide, I just have a few do's and don'ts to take away, and this is specifically for the written comment. And I'll say just a few things about presenting a public statement orally at the meeting on May 26th. So do be clear, specific, and concise. A number of public comments that I have had to read during my time in public service was, this is just a terrible rule. It doesn't do any good. It's out to destroy, the public interest. It's like, I can't even tell if you think it's too conservative, it doesn't go far enough, or it goes too far. So, that specificity, clear and concise is so important. Again, finding that common ground and identifying shared concerns is also so important. And being respectful and reasonable. These public comments do genuinely provide the drafters with an opportunity to reconsider problematic areas in the rule to fix it before it officially becomes the law of the land. So the rule of the land. So now is the time to really have your voice heard, and a way to do that is again just through that respectful and reasonable voice. Don't accuse, assume, or exaggerate. Don't generalize, and don't forget to thank the reader. So delivering your comment at the meeting. Submitting a written public statement is perfectly fine. It it all becomes part of the public record. But if you have something particularly impactful to say about a problematic aspect of this rule, if you see a particularly concerning humanitarian component, something you think is going to have really widespread impact, and be extremely detrimental either to you or your industry wide, I'd strongly consider making a public statement on that. Again, a lot of these elements are going to be similar to how you would draft your written statement, but prepare. Strongly encourage a written statement as well if you are going to deliver something orally at the hearing. Organize the main points and think about a memorable story or a key component. If you've ever watched a policy debate between political candidates or folks vying for an appointment or something like that, you may forget the finer details of the particular policy thing that they suggested or were arguing for, but you remember the impact of a story that they told or something that shaped or influenced them. And stories really stick with us and help to solidify the key components that we're arguing for. So consider making it very personal with a story. Make your public statement unique to you, your situation, and unique from your written statement. Don't just stand up there and read a piece of paper, especially on Zoom. That ends up just kind of looking like this, and it can not have the impact or deliver the importance of what you're truly saying. So consider rewriting that for delivery in an oral format. Don't just, again, keep it concise, personal, and memorable. Practice. If you've done a lot of speaking or haven't done any public speaking since high school, you'll remember, practicing your public speech in front of a mirror. It's something that I still do and helps significantly. So, and again, remember, this is going to be on Zoom. So looking at the camera instead of looking down helps to, nothing can replace the in-person element, but really making it seem like, you're making eye contact and you're there. So, and then practice, sorry for the typo, that should be ahead of time. And let's move on to the next slide. So public comment details, comments on these proposed rules may be made at the hearing themselves or written ahead of time. And again, there's that contact for Tasha. All comments must be received by May 26, 2021 at 5 p.m. So on the back on the first slide, I had a link to where there's all the details about the public comment. Before we send these out, I'll update this last slide just to have a specific link. But the Microsoft Teams link is already active, and you can find it on the first slide where I said, read more about the rule. It's available there.
Thank you so much, Hillary. I was taking some notes for my own webinar presenting and making things more compelling and concise. I think outside of the public comment process, we can all improve in those areas as we move more to Zoom. I'm certainly got some room for improvement there. So those are all great tips, but go more back to the substantive part. We really are engaged, as you probably know, on a lot of these issues substantively. And, we've, as Hillary said, she and others in the firm have been in touch with policymakers and rule makers already. So we'd love to hear more from you, the clients, and get you engaged if that's what you'd like to do. Or if not, that's fine. You can share private feedback with us and let us know kind of privately what you're thinking on a no names basis, whatever your level of comfort is there, please just let us know. But one clarifying question in here, which I think would be good for everybody that I wanted to call out is, this new announcement, the rebranding, as you said, does it provide an additional 80 hours of leave, and I think I know the answer to this one, or is it included in the current 80-hour total?
We believe it's included in the 80-hour total.
Right. Right. And so that goes back to the point of this being, as Hunter mentioned, kind of a rebranding or repackaging, just emphasizing that this is a tax credit that's out there and can be relevant to this particular purpose, vaccination, post-vaccination. And Hunter, I'm sorry to put you on the spot. I don't know if you'll know the answer to this because I know this is a relatively new announcement. This one may also be more broadly relevant, but one question says, I see the vaccination credits are listed as eligible for post-April 1st. Do we see this being updated to being available for employees being vaccinated prior to April 1st? You may not know the answer to that one, but I thought I'd put you in an awkward position on a Monday morning to see if you know or have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that, that makes sense, certainly from just, a larger kind of a fair point of view. I know that the goal of the administration is to incentivize vaccinations moving forward, but certainly I don't think they would kind of, accidentally penalize those who got them earlier. So I would imagine there would be some way to amend prior payroll tax returns, things like that. I haven't seen that specific guidance yet, but that would be anticipated.
Yeah. Right. That makes sense. And I think some of the other questions, will probably be, we have to wait and see if there's some additional guidance that comes out. There's some questions about, for example, are there different codes that are relevant? If you're working with a payroll provider and coding this, say, with ADP, things like that. I think it's probably a little early to know, and you should definitely coordinate with your payroll service provider to make sure you're reporting and coding things correctly. If there's one thing I've learned over the last year, working more with SBA and IRS and things like the payroll providers, it is important how you code things. So it's always good to make sure you're following up, make sure you're using the right codes for different types of leave or tax credits. So that's a great question and something not to overlook. I don't think we necessarily know the answer to that right now, and it may be just something to confirm with ADP or any other payroll service provider. Anything else, Hunter or Hillary, that you'd like to cover before we sign off?
No, I'm all set. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, likewise. Thank you all.
Okay, great. Thank you both. Thank you, Jeff and Amy, who are working behind the scenes on the tech and marketing and communication side to support us. And if you asked a question that we didn't get to, we'll follow up. One of us or one of our employment law colleagues will be in touch with you. So thank you for engaging on that front, and hope everybody out there has a great week and stays healthy and safe and engaged with us. Take care. Thank you.